Hey everybody, today we're going to be building a Wasteland Watchtower / outpost, whatever you want to call it. This is going to be the second project in my Post Apocalyptic Terrain series. For this build I took a lot of inspiration from Dying Light 2, which I've been playing recently. Dying Light 2 is pretty much a treasure trove of cool post-apocalyptic terrain ideas. I really like how some of the crudely made shanty structures are kind of built on top of pre-apocalypse buildings, and I wanted to emulate that look in this project. I used the stacks from Ready Player One as reference as well. The stacks are basically a vertical trailer park. They have a more dystopian future vibe to them, but they have a similar look and feel to the buildings in Dying Light. So I thought that would make a good reference as well. So I did a rough sketch of how I wanted this tower to look, and I got to work. In my previous build video, I made some trash piles using some old spray foam rock piles that I started a few years ago and I never finished. I'm using one of those spray foam piles for this build as well. I'm not going to go into too much detail on the base for this thing. If you want to know more about that, you can check out my trash piles video. It's basically the same thing. I marked where I wanted to put the pillars by sticking a few skewers into the foam board, just to kind of get an idea of like how it was actually going to look physically. Okay, so I need some thick cardboard. I have this pastel paper that I'm probably never going to use, so I'm just going to take the cardboard off the back of this thing. Get that out of here. I cut a bunch of strips out of this cardboard to make some I-beams, and I used wood glue to glue them together. Here I'm just running one of the strips down the center of the I-beam to clean up the wood glue so that there's no big globs anywhere. Here I'm adding a bunch of sand around the base to try and weigh it down and get it to sit nice and flat. I actually had to stick some skewers into this part to get these pieces to sit where I wanted them to sit, but you can't actually see it here. Next I had to position my I-beams so that they were all nice and level and sitting at the same height. But before doing that I decided to take a quick breakfast break. Ooh, that's too hot. I went for 3.5 inches of space between the stories. That seems like enough space to me to get your hands in there, because playability is one of the most important things to me. I want to be able to reach in there and put minis on that platform. So I started gluing these things together with wood glue. I had to chisel away at the foam in certain spots to get the pillars to sit properly, and I used hot glue to secure them to the foam. I used a couple scrap pieces of cardboard as spacers to make sure that I had these pillars spaced apart properly, and I also used a level to make sure that they were the same height. I used a few rubber bands to hold the pillars together while I was gluing the cross beams on. Once the I-beams were nice and dry, I started putting some flooring on this thing. I used some rough cuts of foam board. I cut the foam board so that it would overhang a little bit. I wanted it to look like it was dilapidated and falling apart. Dilapidated, that's such a weird word. I notched out some corners on the center platform so that it would sit on all the cross beams. And then I glued the platforms down with hot glue. For the living quarters, I wasn't quite sure how I wanted them to look. The rough sketch was more of a guideline to me, so I was kind of experimenting with different ideas and seeing which one I liked better. I had a few small boxes that I cut apart to test things out. I decided to make 2 cargo containers out of this box, and then I wanted to stack them at ground level. To make those, I first had to seal up the boxes. And then I pretty much just wrapped them in corrugated paper. and I glued stirring sticks around the edges to act as trim. Yeah, this is kind of starting to feel like a waste management commercial. After getting my storage containers in place, I started weathering the platforms. I glued this little walkway extension around the bottom of this box, and I cut some slits into that to create the illusion of individual panels. And I decided that I wanted this little walkway to wrap around the outside of the structure instead of the inside. That kind of opened up the perimeter a little bit more on the top floor. I built this little extended platform with stir sticks and cardboard, and it's held up with skewers. I would have liked to use some thicker wooden dowels for this, something about like the thickness of a telephone pole, but I didn't have anything that thick, so I used these instead. I layered popsicle sticks onto the top of these platforms. I kind of wanted the holes underneath to show through a little bit, just to kind of emphasize that these boards were put on top to make the structure a little bit safer. I'm extending them out a little bit further here, just because this is where the stairs are going to be. And you'll notice that the popsicle sticks fit up almost perfectly between each rung of this little fence that I made. This is actual livestock fencing that I cut a small piece off of. I also used this for some of the ladders that you'll see later on. Next, I built my stairs. I've never made stairs before, so that's why these stairs look so shitty. But that's one of the nice things about building post-apocalyptic structures. You can pretty much get away with anything. I think they ended up looking pretty good. I should have probably used wood glue instead of hot glue though. I did a little bit of weathering on these boards with a hobby knife. And then I scattered some little cardboard panels here and there and built up some wooden fencing using coffee stir sticks and matchsticks. I thought it would be cool to build up a little pile of scrap boards and things to kind of act as a staircase to get up to the second platform here. I decided not to glue this down to kind of add a little bit of modularity to this build. I built a few more add-on pieces like this, you'll see those later on. Next, I glued a few corrugated pieces onto some of the sections of the walls. I like to tear off a few of the corners of these corrugated pieces. I do that so I can add some rust later on and make it look like it's partially rusted away. And here I am gluing one of the ladders on. I doubled up some coffee stir sticks here and made some diagonal cuts. I made 2 of these to kind of form like an X shape, just to strengthen up these 2 columns. For the walls on this little building, I used coffee stir sticks once again. I used matchsticks to frame out the doors and windows. And I cut out sections of the cardboard before I put the boards on, because I wanted these walls to have a few holes in them. The windows are all different sizes, but they're all 6 boards high. Here I put a matchstick behind the boards to make it look like the frame was exposed. I used my Dremel to cut some of these boards off on the ends, pretty much just because it was fun to do. But you could use pretty much anything to cut these, or you could just break them off. The doors are just cardboard panels that I cut out. And I used a hobby drill and a small bent piece of paper clip to make the handles. At that point I layered some more trash around the base of this thing. This is a pretty good way to use up your scrap pieces. And while that was drying, I worked on the roof. The roof went through a few different iterations before I decided to call it finished. Mostly that was because when I started this, I wasn't 100% sure if I wanted to add some lighting or not, and I didn't really plan it out that well, so I had to rework some things a few times to get everything to fit together. I rolled up some trash bags using some modeling material, which I then scattered around the base. Once everything was dry, I primed the piece with spray paint, using a combination of brown and silver spray paint. Then I started painting in some of the details, putting a coat of Mod Podge and paint on the corrugated pieces, building up layers of grime on the platforms, and painting / dry brushing my metallics. I went in with some black to darken up some of the recessed areas, just to kind of build a little more contrast. I put a coat of tanned flesh on the boards because I thought it would be a good base color. I dry brushed that tanned flesh color on almost everything. I thought it was a good unifying color. And then I dry brushed everything with a skeleton bone. That does a pretty good job of catching some of the edges and creating some edge highlights, and also bringing out some of the details. After that, I mixed up a dark brown wash. And I selectively cleaned that up with a paper towel. So at that point, everything was mostly painted, and I wanted to add some blue tarps. So I used my draped canvas effect that I've used in a few other videos, only this time I used a blue color. I built the color up with ink and paint until I was happy with it, and then I cut a tissue into quarters. And it was a double ply tissue, so I could have gotten up to 8 tarps, but I decided to just use 5. Here I'm just cleaning up some of the areas where the blue paint spilled over, and dry brushing a lighter blue onto these tarps. Here's my little add-on bits after I put a wash on them. I dry brushed a desert yellow pretty heavily over most of the base, because I wanted to match my trash piles and the board that I'm using this with. Finally, I went in with some monster brown and some lava orange and painted some rust effects on anything metallic. Beyond that, I finished up the roof off camera, so you'll see that in the glamour shots. So the painting was mostly done at this point. I just needed to work on the roof. I built this little lean-to on top of the roof, and I also added some fencing later on because I thought it needed it. I thought this shack seemed a little too tall, so I cut the top 2 boards off to shorten it up a little bit. So after this last Christmas, I bought a bunch of Christmas lights on discount, and these are my favorite, honestly. I wish I would have picked more of these up because I really like these. If I had more of them, I probably would have rigged more lights up, but this was all I had. So in Dying Light, the UV lights pretty much like hurt the zombies. So at nighttime, all the safe zones have UV lights because that's the only safe place to be. And a lot of those safe zones are on rooftops and up high so that the zombies can't get them during the day either, because they mostly roam around on the ground. So I wanted to rig this tower up like a safe zone. So I tried to rig up my purple lights, aka UV lights, in a strategic way to kind of create like a safe house. But I also used a green light on the outside, and then I put 2 yellow lights on the inside of the shack, and I think that gave it some pretty good variety. So the wires were all on the inside of this shack, and they were pretty unsightly, so I decided to cover up the windows with some tinted glass. And for that, I cut up some empty IPA containers, which come in this like foggy plastic, which you can't really see through, but it lets the light through, which is what I wanted. And I also cut up some paper clips to make some bars for the windows, which I super glued on. Yeah, you can see it's a pretty big mess in there. I also did a super quick paint job on these OnePageRules models. These are some of the models from the Eternal Dynasty line that they're doing right now. And this isn't a promotion for them, but I've had them printed out for a few weeks now, and I thought they would look pretty good in these pictures. So I decided to paint a few of them up real quick and put them in here. I want to thank you for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to see more builds like this, go ahead and like and subscribe. I hope you have a good day, and I will see you later.